Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another MaRS Best Practices event where we take a deep dive into specific topics in entrepreneurship. This afternoon, we have a panel led by John McLeod. Today's topic is tips into selling into the education ecosystem, and we're very excited to have John McLeod, Mohsen, Scott, and Stuart, who will be Skyping in from Victoria. John McLeod is a marketing and business development executive focused on helping high-growth technology companies to achieve their vision. For the past 8 years, he has been a member of the executive team at Desire to Learn Incorporated, and which is a global software as service-based learning solutions provider. As Vice President of Marketing, he was instrumental in the company's growth from 40 to 900 employees, which is not insignificant, ultimately serving more than 10 million learners around the globe. Right now, John is also working with Communitech in their Grow Factor program as a fractional executive. I'll have him explain what that means exactly. Providing marketing and business development expertise to small and medium-sized technology companies who want to build their brand and drive rapid and sustainable growth. Just a bit more background on John. Prior to Desire to Learn, he was a key member of senior management teams, driving growth in both startup ventures and large tech companies, including Metronet Communications, AT&T Canada, and Allstream. He is currently a member of the board of directors for a non-profit organization and co-chairs a marketing peer-to-peer group with Communitech. I'll leave him to do the proper introductions of our panelists. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see so many of you here. It's obviously a very popular topic, and we hope that today's session is going to give you a really good opportunity to have some insights into this very interesting and challenging discussion area. This morning's session is going to take a few different formats, and I'll walk through that in just a second. But just to kick it off, to talk about education in general, there's a lot of things going on as it transitions over the time we're in right now, and it covers everything from the need for growth. There's the challenges in funding. There's the ongoing demand for better student learning outcomes, and certainly, as many of us are involved, are the challenges and the opportunities we see with technology in and of itself and the changes that it's undergoing. And it's with that context that we want to look at how to speak to and how to work with the sector to help drive new business opportunity. Going back only a few short years, there was many companies who really tried to stay away from the education sector. It was something where, although they recognized there's lots of potential there, possibly, it had a lot of challenges, so they kind of stayed away from it. But today, as you see from the interest in the room here, but also the number of new Edtech startups seeking opportunity there, there's a lot of people now reorienting their sights there, and certainly in the investment community as well, starting to help fund all of these entrepreneurial pursuits, and I know many of you are involved with those now. It's interesting to see that change. So with that big opportunity, and there's lots of it with all of the different sectors, even within the education market around the globe, there's also a number of challenges, and I think many of you are probably experiencing some of those right now, and hence the need for, or hopefully the need for today's panel discussion, where we're fortunate to have 3 experts coming in to share their own perspectives in how to be more effective in selling and working with the education sector. So through the course of the morning, we're going to cover off, I think, lots of topic areas. We'll try to get into whatever level of depth we can, bearing in mind that we do have some time limits. And I'm going to try to moderate through that, so there will be points I'll probably have to cut people off, so bear with me if we get to that point. So with that, I'm going to do a brief intro of our speakers this morning. And if you'd like a full bio on them, if you go on the MaRS website, under the events section within today's topic area, you can see their full bio. But in interest of time, I'm just going to do a very quick intro of these folks, and then we're going to get to it. So first off, I'm going to go to the west coast of Canada, to Victoria, I think. Okay, our first speaker. So Stuart Bowness is the co-founder and CEO of MediaCore. And for those who are not familiar with the company, MediaCore is an educational video platform for universities and schools. And they're a sizable company as they're now serving 500,000 students on a monthly basis. Next, we've got with us is Mohsen Shahini. Mohsen is a co-founder and chief academic officer with a company here in Toronto called Top Hat. And Top Hat's a classroom technology that enables educators to engage students more effectively by allowing them to work with their mobile devices in the classroom. Welcome, Mohsen. Third, we have Scott Welch. And Scott is the vice president of sales and marketing and also co-founder of a company here called Edsby. And Edsby is a cloud-based social learning platform focused on engaging students within districts and K-12 schools. So a good range and background of these speakers, I think, are going to provide a really diverse set of perspectives to help you better understand this education ecosystem and how you can be more effective in selling into it. So gentlemen, all three of you, thank you for joining us today. And the format we're going to walk through is first we're going to hear a brief perspective from a couple of the panelists just to give a real short 2-3 minute overview from their view. And then we're going to go into a whole series of questions that we've laid out to walk through. And we'll give each of the panelists an opportunity to speak to those different questions. And then finally, we're going to come back to you, the audience, to go through a more formal Q&A. I would say if you do have questions, please note them as we go through, and we'll give you an opportunity further into the session where you can come up to the mic, and please do use the mic because this is being recorded, so we want to make sure we capture the audio. So if that's good with everyone, that's the format we're going to roll through this morning. With that, I'm going to get things started. I'm going to call on Mohsen first and foremost to give a short perspective.
Take a seat, I guess?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. Just give a little bit of the, I guess, implications and my perspective on this topic today. I think I want to maybe touch on the topic that probably brought all of us here today, and about our belief and our passion in this path, that we want to do something in education, and why I am here today to speak. We're going to hear probably a lot about today's that education market is a really tough market. So we're going to hear a lot about the problems and challenges we're going to all deal with in education. So there's going to be a lot of disappointing news probably about things that is going on. But what I'm going to say at the beginning, maybe start with something positive. And that is from my own experience. I never really thinking about building a business. I've been always passionate about solving problems. The way that I basically approached education was that when I was a teenager, I was thinking, you know what, I'm going to go to a school. I'm going to learn a lot of things about science, technology, various things, and I'm going to get to the point in my life, maybe at the age of 20 or something, and then I'm going to be at the age where I have a general understanding of the science and knowledge. And then I'm going to observe the world, and I'm going to identify the top big challenges that we as humans are encountering, and I'm going to pick the top challenge that we have, and I'm going to encounter it. I'm going to invest the rest of my life, or whatever it takes to fix it, in order for me to actually make a big impact and effectively solve that problem. So this has been my vision when I was a teenage, and I thought, yeah, this is pretty objective. It's pretty good. This is a pretty interesting life. So I went into education, and I learned science and all that, and I my education. I graduated from undergrad in engineering, and I picked the big challenge and big problem of the life, but it was not education. It was on health. I thought that health is the biggest issue that we have in today's life. I thought that a lot of people around us are healthy today. They're very great people. They're very knowledgeable. They have learned a lot of things in their life. They went to school, but unfortunately, for various reasons, they develop various diseases, and over years they become deteriorate, and then they basically, unfortunately, we lose them, and that really bothered me a lot. So I thought, this is what I'm going to go after. So guess what? I was an engineer. I did not know anything about science, so I started learning about science. I started learning about biology. I started learning about genetics and things like that. I never really learned throughout my life. I never really cared about really learning them as much, and I found that this is a big challenge in there. So then I started thinking about the problem. I'm like, okay, well, health is a big problem, But before that, we really need to fix the problem of education, because people that they go to school, they think that they learn, but in fact they don't. Or either they just learn for a period of time and then they forget the material, and then when they go to the industry, they actually never really use those knowledge in their workplace. Or it's just education is not as exciting. No one really sees the application of education. So that took me to this education, and sure enough, people told me that when we started raising funding, they told me that, hey, this is going to be tough. This is going to be a challenge. Investor told us, no money. We're not going to give you money. But I was very naive. I thought that people are probably stupid, because this is a big challenge here. And then how can you not be able to propose a solution for a problem and people wouldn't buy it? So I kind of really neglected that perspective at the time. And and then as we were here, I mean, we had a lot of fun, but I'm happy to be here today to share some of the stuff that we learned, and hopefully some of them would be effective for you. But I'm going to just tell you guys, this is a bigger problem that we have. And if you really, truly believe that this is a big problem, you got to find a way to fix it, because this is a really, really big problem. So we just have to be very observant and smart about it, and hopefully we'll all fix it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohsen. Like to hear that passion. That's good. You need a lot of that and that kind of drive to persevere. That's great. So next we're going to hear from Scott.
Okay, so my name's Scott Welch. I'm co-founder of Edsby, and in some ways, it's pretty well the opposite story. Never wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I went to Waterloo and got a degree in math. Went to work at Nortel right as a co-op student and right out of school, and built, just basically by a fluke, an incredibly successful. So sort of the first successful product I built was a product called Meridian Mail, which I'm sure all of you have used, the world's most successful voicemail system. I built the OS and a big chunk of the disk handling subsystem. Invested my entire life into it, took 2 years, and at the end of it, I got a little pen set and a handshake. And I realized, this was really stupid. Like, this was really, really stupid. And so my partners and I, there was 3 of us, we left Nortel and we started our own company in '89, and had no idea what to do. But it just happened that when we were looking around for something to do, sort of a friend came to us. It happened to be from the Toronto Board of Ed, at the time Scarborough Board of Ed, and they wanted an email system. And we just built quite a fantastic email system in Meridian Mail, and we said, we could build you one of those. And so we kind of shook hands and went off and built it, and that became our second product, First Class, which was a globally successful email and collaboration system, which we ended up selling extensively in education, although it was not an education product. It was a horizontal market product, but we built some very specific things in it that made it very attractive to education. Chief among them, scalability. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that if you're talking about education, contrast it with corp. If you're talking about corporate, 500 user corporation is pretty big. There's less than 1,000 corporations in the United States with more than 10,000 employees. Corporations are actually pretty small. For school boards, 10,000 users is nothing, right? There's lots of school boards out there with 50, 100, 200,000 users. So 4 years ago, we decided to, we finally were finished with First Class, and we left and did our second startup, Core4, and we made a very conscious decision that we were going to target education, and we were going to target K-12, the hardest group to sell into. And not only that, we were going to target going in through the front door. So target systems that have to integrate with the districts, which I would say is one of the single most difficult sales that there are out there. We're now 4 years into it. Edsby is struggling to life. So last year we signed a big deal with the 8th largest school district in the US for a full in through the front door 100% rollout. We have over 100,000 unique logins from that district every week. We now have over 1/3 users on Edsby. So the fight isn't over yet, but we are well into it. And I'm going to share with you some of the stuff we've learned over the 25 years.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott. Another good set of perspectives from your view. So thanks for sharing that. Stuart's going to hold some of his comments, I think, till we get into the actual questions. So with that, I'm going to move into a whole series of questions now. We try to lay them out logically in the sense to cover that whole cycle that you're probably thinking about as you move and try to sell into the sector. So we're going to get to it. So guys, I'm going to just start this off, and maybe the first go around we'll call on Stuart to make his comments first, since he hasn't had a chance to speak yet. First off, what do you see as the fundamental differences in marketing into the education sector at large, not one specific part of it, but education at large, as compared to other vertical industries?
So I think that, certainly from a venture capitalist perspective, and then I think also from an entrepreneur perspective, when I first got going with MediaCore, I was coming from a consulting background where I built and designed web apps and mobile apps for a variety of Fortune 500 companies and big startups out of the Valley. In 2009, I finished redesigning YouTube for Google, and then kind of came into really building MediaCore, my first product on my own. And as we kind of got going and really started focusing in on the education sector, one of the things that I think really stuck out like a sore thumb was kind of like this general belief that when you're selling an education, when you're marketing an education, the second that you are creating a lead and then trying to get that lead from being a lead into being an opportunity, you're looking at lead to close times that are like 6 to 12 months. And I think that a big difference when you're used to selling to the enterprise and then you kind of go into education is that educators are very casual in their approach as buyers. I kind of learned that the first time that I went to a meeting with a CIO and I wore a suit, and the guy showed up, I think he was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And I just kind of realized that it's just a completely different both manner of selling and a completely different way of engaging with your customers. You really have to kind of be much more personal, especially as a CEO. And I think that also kind of keeping in mind that often when you're trying to target a specific audience in education, often it's not just one person. Sometimes it's a group of people. So for example, when we sell our product, we're selling to CIOs, CTOs, and chief academic officers. And targeting just one individually is sometimes not as effective as targeting multiple. So I think that kind of broadly trying to think of creative marketing programs that kind of get around some of those key challenges are definitely things you have to think about when you're kind of getting going into education, thinking about how you reach your target audience, and then also really knowing who that target audience is, right down to their role or their roles, plural. So just kind of, I think we'll kind of get into more detail on this as we get going, but those are a couple of my quick thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, definitely you've covered a number of items there that we are going to explore a bit further, because getting into some understanding of some of those points is really critical, and probably some of the information I think the audience would like to hear more about. So, Mohsen, do you want to comment next?
Yeah, I think I agree with some of the comments that Steve mentioned, specifically about the complexity of you're dealing with various type of persona here, and I think we'll probably talk more on that. But if I want to say something from a different perspective, I'd probably add something on the fundamental level. I think what I found is very weird in education market is that the person that you're selling to, or the end user, whoever is going to use your product or buy it, is not going to be seeing the benefit right away. So most of the, if you want to say build a business, say have a coffee shop around the corner, all you need to do is that figuring out how you make your coffee taste better, and then the buyers comes and pay you money, and then they take the first sip, and then they enjoy it. They right away enjoy it. They're happy about it, and they come back tomorrow. Or if people save their money and they buy a car, and then they can drive and go to a gateway, and then they enjoy the money they spend on. But in education, it really requires the benefit that the end users, which education is just a benefit, is like long term. You really have to convince people that, look, this great product or content or whatever that I created for you, it is going to help you 10 years from now, 5 years from now, to be more successful in your career. And I think it's very difficult because it requires different types of marketing and sales approach. And I found it, quite frankly, the most challenging part of the education, selling to education.
Okay, thanks, Mohsen. Scott.
Yeah. I'd kind of echo what you two guys said as well. Just, I'm going to emphasize this even more. The whole time scale of dealing with education is just fundamentally different than, well, especially in the modern world, right? So when I started 25 years ago, it was a little bit different because now, of course, the idea of most apps is that they get adopted and, wow, look at that. Like, we doubled our user base in the last 3 weeks sort of thing. That's not going to happen in Edu, okay? In fact, in Edu, you're often talking about 12 to 24-month sales cycles. The flip side is that you have these incredibly long-term relationships with your customers. So, I have lots of first-class customers where I'm busy out trying to sell them Edsby, but there are people who I sold first-class to 10 or 15 or even 20 years ago. And so there's this potential to build an incredible long-term annuity stream if you build your business right. And the flip side of that, and this is also another really weird one, and it kind of comes to what you were saying as well. We're very used to in business sort of have this idea that we build the coffee shop and we sell somebody the coffee and they like the coffee and they come back and buy more coffee. Thumbs up, right? But in education, you often have this very peculiar situation. I'm sure you get this really well as well. Your economic buyer and your end user are completely divorced, right? So you're selling to maybe the IT department, which is the CIO, CTO, and the teachers who are the ones who are actually using the product. And so in this very weird way, you actually have a very close relationship with your customer, your economic buyer, because in a lot of ways, they're the ones who are representing your product to the end users. So, what that means is that if your product has a problem, it makes your sort of partner there at the school look bad. And the flip side is, if your product solves problems for that person, then they're going to love you, and you've got a relationship that you can take to the bank. So.
Great comment, Scott. Yeah, you're already hearing some of the very fundamental differences that you're going to face as you move into the education market. And there's varying degrees of those for sure, but that longer sales cycle, understanding the economic buyer versus the end user, those are key things to bear in mind. Guys, next question I want to talk about is a bit about building your brand and awareness for who you are. And again, I don't know the stages of your companies that you're coming from, but I'm going to suggest there's probably a big range in the room. One of the key things is to make sure those buyers know who you are in the first place. And guys, if you could comment just briefly on, are there differences or ways that you undertake having that target audience understand who your company is and how they get to you in the first place? And maybe we'll start this way. Scott, you can kick it off.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is yeah, I feel like a little bit of a fraud here because, of course, like you guys, I'm challenged with this because, of course, typically, you're undercapitalized and stuff like that. For us, again, having been through it twice, part of it is realizing that it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a very long time. I think the single most important thing that we did this time was we worked hard to get a good product name. So Edsby, it's short, it's sweet. You'll notice he's a friendly guy. It's, it took us a very long time to come up with a name, but we have the domain. It comes up first when you Google it. It's very hard. And then the next thing to do is to realize that a lot, especially in K-12, a lot of marketing is very localized. You're never gonna, unless you're Google, even Pearson doesn't have blanket ads everywhere.
Right.
So often very regionalized, very focused. So would the average person know about Edsby? Definitely not. Would the average school board know about Edsby? Definitely not. Would the average school board near Hillsborough, Florida know about Edsby? Yes, definitely, because we're going to radiate from that sale. So focus is very important.
Okay, great, thanks. Mohsen?
Yeah, assuming that most people are in this audience probably are in the very earliest stage, I definitely agree and definitely want to warn you against thinking about spending high capital on increasing your awareness at the beginning. as an entrepreneurs, I always thought that the one single, things that you can control is your own time. You could just get out of your desk, just see your audience in front of them, just talk to them. You can meet 20 people, 30 people, as many people as you can at the beginning. Just instead of thinking about, I'm going to spend 5K, 10K thinking about an ad or an effective way of marketing or bringing more awareness. I don't think that's a very wise, marketing strategy at the very early stage. Again, I don't know which stage you are at. Obviously, at a certain point, you want to start thinking about, thought leaderships and kind of setting your brands as conveying a specific kind of messages across the board. But for most entrepreneurs, I would say just meeting them, talking to them face to face. Just keep talking to them. Here's who we are, and then down the road, and then you figure out what is your core message, and then you could build some more marketing campaign around that.
Right. Thanks, Mohsen. I certainly appreciate the comment too about you're not going to go spend big $10,000 or $100,000 ad campaigns out of the gate. So you got to be a lot more creative in how you're going to go and build up that awareness in the early days, and even through the different stages of growth, for sure. Stuart, you want to comment?
Yeah, I've got a few different ones on this. I think that when we started, certainly I kind of like to echo Mohsen's comments there about the idea of really getting out in front of your audience. I think that's incredibly important. That's something that I spent a lot of time doing in the early days, was just talking to professors, talking to students about their problems, then talking to administration, and then really trying to figure out all the pieces between all of those various users, or not necessarily even users, really kind of personas, user personas. I think really kind of understanding your target market, who's using it, drafting up those persona stories, and then start thinking about like, okay, so if my buyer in our case is a CIO, what do CIOs read? Where do they engage? What conferences do they attend? How will I meet them? And then as we kind of got into that, the first year or two, we spent quite a bit of time engaging in thought leadership exercises. So we spoke a lot. South by Southwest EDU was really awesome for us. We keynoted there this year. And last year we spoke as well. And those have been really terrific places to engage, because you are often meeting people that are thought leaders in their roles, who are your buyers. And then you're also meeting people that you can potentially strategically partner with. So for example, last year after talking at EDU, we met Pearson, and then 4 months later we had a strategic partnership with them, which was awesome. And so those kinds of in-person, face-to-face leadership exercises, I think, are very important. I would also say that Twitter is super important with educators, because they're one of the most verbose groups using Twitter. Mm-hmm. And we do all kinds of interesting things with Twitter ad retargeting. So the thing is that once like we know, for example, there are 10,000 CIO, CTO, chief academic officers in U.S. higher education, and we know what they read, we know where they go. We know that they're using Twitter. We know also that they engage quite well through email. So just kind of to add on to that point, I would say big data is very much your friend. And I think it's a little different with K-12, and maybe Scott could probably speak to that better than I could. But with higher education, you can literally get access to every email address for every senior decision maker in the entire, in the entirety of global higher education. And so we actually wrote scripts that essentially kind of like Google style would crawl and index higher ed websites, pull out senior decision makers' email addresses, throw those into a targeted list. And our targeted list now, I think we have less than 1% to 2% bounce rates. That list building system that we've used, every email that goes out, the second that they open the email, they start getting our ad retargeting. And so we are super tight focused on reaching our exact decision maker And then after they've received a piece of marketing from us, they get retargeted everywhere they go. So they literally can't escape us. And I'll often get customers being like, oh, I saw your YouTube ad the other day. It's so awesome. You guys are doing such great things, blah, 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 blah. And I think that it's one of those things where if you can just get in their face and stay consistently at the top of their mind, when they come to making that buying decision 6 months or 12 months down the road, you're at the top of their list because you've had exposure to them over that 12-month period. So for us, those kind of like thought leadership components to Twitter, to kind of using big data, to then implementing these really tight retargeting campaigns is really the center of our whole marketing strategy, and I think it's been really returning massive dividends for us this year. And we've gotten a lot of top tier universities. Now we're working with over 80 universities that are using our product, and it's one of these things that it just works like clockwork.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, a lot of great input from the three of you on this. Some practical tips about how to actually work with that. One of the points, and I think it was underlying your comment, Stuart, and you didn't say it directly, but I want to make sure that the message taken away, though, is not to bombard them with messaging that's just about your product. I think you have to be a little more thoughtful, and I know Stuart's implying this, is around how you're adding value to their day. I mean, they will engage with you, but you got to think about what's the problem that they're facing and ensure that whatever it is you're messaging out to them is helping them look at things and hopefully be more effective within their constituency.
Yeah, totally. You know, I think I should have added that point. The advertising that we send out is definitely not about our product. You know, for example, if you watch one of our YouTube ads, it's not really about our product. It's really more about like a CIO at a major university talking about the things that they challenge with, and at the end there's just literally like a 1 second roll that just says that this is like a little logo that says MediaCore, and so it's like a university talking about university CIO talking about major strategic issues for them, and then at the end you kind of get a brand impression. But it's one of these things where like our engagement rates, I think 50% of all of our YouTube watchers will watch the entire ad. Yeah. And it's because it's really adding value. And the same thing with Twitter and your thought leadership. Like, you're not really evangelizing your product or your company. You're speaking to ideas and strategies and things that these decision makers are really struggling with. And I think that's what causes engagement, like you're saying.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. We spoke at the first question more around the marketing to the education sector, and I think one of the things here is a little more of a fine point on actually the selling and the sales process into education. And if I could ask you guys just to comment briefly on what you see as any specific differences of selling to education versus other sectors, but even more specifically is maybe the difference between K-12 versus higher ed. And you can discuss both sides of that fence, or you can pick one if you prefer. And Stuart, are you okay to start off on that one?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that this has been quite an interesting one for us, and we've learned a lot. We kind of started out selling to both universities and schools, and we still have some school customers, but we've largely focused on universities for a variety of reasons. But kind of the big ones for us, and when we've been sort of looking at the differences between the two sectors, universities behave much more like corporations. They have senior decision makers that have very defined titles like CIO, CTO, Chief Academic Officer, President, and schools are sometimes a little bit more nebulous, and role definitions tend to be also a little bit more nebulous. So their titles, especially when you look more globally, they tend to change quite dramatically. So, for example, like UK K-12 is very, very different from US or Canadian K-12, and so I think that in terms of trying to figure out who you're exactly targeting, it sometimes is much harder, or I think that we found it much harder in K-12 than it was in higher ed. I would also say that K-12 really, when you're selling in K-12, to me, it's more like if universities like selling to a big corporate, K-12 is definitely you're selling to the government. And so the sales cycles, from our perspective, are sometimes considerably longer than than the higher ed sort of like equivalent deal. And so I would say that if you're trying to abstract it, I would definitely say that from my perspective, K-12 is absolutely the harder market. You also get a lot more people involved in decision making. So quite often when we sell in higher ed, we get a single decision maker at the top. I don't think we've ever had that in K-12. So just from our perspective over the last 2 years in selling into both markets, that's a few of the differences that we see.
Thank you, Stuart. Scott, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yeah, so basically, first class, we sold both to higher ed and to K-12. So I had a lot of experience selling to both. Lots of higher ed customers with first class. Basically, I mean, everything he said. The other thing which for me always was a bit of a funny thing selling into higher ed, and I'm sure you've run into this as well with D2L. Higher ed has computer science departments. And so one of the fundamental differences between higher ed and K-12 is that in higher ed, you absolutely will have somebody in the room who says, more or less, well, we could build that in 2 or 3 months, really, for sure. We could build that ourselves. Much better, absolutely. You always have to contend with that in higher ed. You rarely have to contend with that in K-12. But everything else about K-12, what he said is absolutely correct. Incredibly long sales cycles. All things being equal, incredibly unlikely that you'll ever make a sale in the middle of an academic year in K-12. Almost always it's going to get implemented over the summer, therefore you'll make the sales in the spring, therefore you go to the winter trade show round, right? Very, very long term. Very consensus oriented, very committee oriented. Oftentimes, different than a university, oftentimes, the cap for requiring a tender or an RFP is very, very, very low. In lots of school boards, it's $25,000 or $50,000. So you can almost certainly guarantee you'll be in an RFP situation. That means that even if you have an ally there, you can't even talk to them. You can get kicked out if you talk to them. I mean, it is a complex, long-term, many hoops to jump through situation. The flip side is that once you've made the sale, you really can be collecting checks there for 10 or 15 years, right? Yeah. So very much a trade-off, long-term versus short-term.
Sure. Great. Mohsen?
Yeah, I thought as we are in higher education, we never really did any effective marketing to K-12. We do have users in K-12. We never really tried to sell to them directly ourselves. But we always thought that higher education is lengthy already. Now that you tell me K-12 is, I'm like, holy. So I think it also depends on, again, who you're selling to and what is what your product is. Essentially, it's if you're selling to CIO or enterprise product for across the school, then I think you deal with lengthier cycles. For us, we started as enterprise, and then we realized that it's going to take time, and we didn't have cash to just wait and for the big check to come hopefully down the road after 6 months or a year. So we kind of pivoted, and then we sold directly to the to teachers or essentially students. So if I want to speak from that perspective, maybe I would say the difference between K-12 and higher education is in higher educations, students actually have credit card. In K-12, you can't really rely and count on that.
In K-12, even the teachers and principals have no buying power.
Right.
Like really, yeah. A teacher might have $100 to spend in a year, right, on everything. Supplies, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, I don't know how you guys make money. I was thinking K-12 is just no-brainer. We're just never gonna get into that market. But the thing, again, on K-12, maybe on the flip side is that there are actually more educators and especially for our business where we're dealing with classroom engagement and effective teaching in the classroom, there are far more K-12 teachers that they come to our website and they want to learn more and they really are interested in actually doing something for the classroom. So it's actually easier to kind of get someone to use their product, but they don't have money to pay. That's the challenge. But in higher education, professors, they're not really much, they don't have much interest in doing great in classroom. They think that students are on their own. If they come to my class, good. If they didn't, I don't care. So that's a situation we're dealing with. So, maybe I would say that that's one thing. The other things maybe is the technology again. For us, the higher education, everyone has a device in the classroom. You don't have to convince a professor that, oh, your students already have a device in the classroom. Everyone has a tablet or smartphones or various kind of gadgets that they deal with.
They've got Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and they get Wi-Fi in the classroom. This is their fundamental things. If you go to the school board, I think you either have to come up with like plans for getting government iPod things, and you just have to deal with a lot of kind of logistics. It just seems to me that it's very challenging. So again, I'm not going to say that there's definitely a bigger problem in K-12, to my opinion, in terms of fixing the problem than it is in higher education. But I am not an expert at all.
I would add just one other thing that I just also realized is that. Pilots in higher education are often a lot more lucrative than they are in K-12. And so, for example, like for us, like when we start piloting with a university, we have a ticket size that's about $9,200, and it's just under their 10K spend limit. And so, without any approval of a faculty member likes that, or like a key faculty member, without the CIO, CTO signing off on it, if we just target a department head. They're fully capable of buying it. You'd never be able to get a $10,000 deal size at a school, for an initial rollout. No. If you target a district, maybe, but the time to sell to a district at a 10K point is just it's not even really worth it. Yeah. So that's something that we found as well.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, like. Even worse than that, like oftentimes there's even things like collective agreements in place where they can't roll out software without providing training to the teachers, right? So you can't even make a pilot happen. So.
Yeah, great perspectives, guys. Again, seeing a lot of differences. It's interesting hearing you guys, knowing your businesses lean one way or the other on getting your perspective on that and where you think it's more challenging. And it's kind of gone a bit both ways. So very interesting to hear. There's a number of questions that I still want to go through, and we have a few that I'd like to just hit real quick. Stuart, you touched on this idea of selling into other countries, and you touched on it very briefly. I'm wondering, guys, can you just give a real quick few words on, do you see differences in those different geographic markets? So here at Canada, relative to the US, relative to international. Maybe, Mohsen, you can give a quick comment.
Yeah, sure, because that's something that really kind of affected our business heavily, I would say. Well, I mean, right off the bat, I guess everyone probably have heard of the ancillary fees that we have just in Ontario as the only province in the world where in higher education, you're not actually allowed to sell something to the students which affects their grades, the final grades is relying on. So it's and that's just been in Ontario, not any part of the Canada even, and then that's kind of we found it very strange because other competitors, like Clicker's company, for example, because they have a hardware device, they can sell it to the students because they own the hardware device, but you can't sell it digital because the students don't own anything, like this is not tangible. So there's all these different kind of terminologies or things that sometimes these legislators pass and sometimes doesn't make any sense. So anyways, we actually followed up with the Ministry of Education 2 years, 3 years, and we got it fixed. So I'm glad to announce that, like a couple of months ago, I think they kind of amended the law, so now we can actually sell in Ontario without having any fear of that we actually breaching the law. So there are in fact cases like that we have had here. Another thing that we had, we start selling in Australia, and in Australia, students just never pay anything other than the tuition fee that they pay. So when they go to school, even their textbook, for example, is provided by the university. We didn't know anything about it, so we thought that, oh, it's great. A couple of professors came to our website. They're very interested in our product, and then they adopted it as a pilot. And we thought that, hey, maybe it's a good opportunity there. So we sent our troops there. We had an office there down there, And then we start selling in Australia just to learn that it's actually not as easy to crack in because it's a totally different market.
Sure.
That's I think this, you really need to understand. I would just say, stay in the market. Again, for entrepreneurs, don't try to spread yourself too thin. If there's a market right here, in the street, in the town, just go for it first and penetrate here, because it's very easy to learn the ropes here and then develop a strategy without getting too much distracted by a lot of these inbound leads or things that come to your website and then they distract you. So don't do that.
Focus.
Yeah.
Stuart.
We started out, and our business partner is British. We had a here in Victoria and then another office in London, and so we were selling in Europe and selling in North America at the same time. North America is by far the easiest and biggest market to sell into. From my perspective, European institutions are much slower making decisions. They also have much more restricted IT spend, and we've had a much harder time, I think, penetrating in the UK. And then certainly, we've got like adoption in Holland and in Norway and a few other Scandinavian countries. But it's just very sporadic. And the problem is that they all want everything localized in their own local languages. So you're on the product side, you end up sort of paying for it. And I think that makes it quite challenging from that perspective. So the nice thing about North America is just that it's English only, and it's a really, really big market. Europe is a huge market, but then you have to deal with internationalization and supporting those languages. So when a user sends you an email in Spanish, how does your support group respond to that? I think it's a really tough thing. Asia. This last year, I had the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time. The British government had a big event where they had a whole pile of big British education companies. The British government paid us to go to Hong Kong and to Kuala Lumpur to sell our products in Asia. And I did it mostly because I wanted a bit of a vacation, and it was around Christmas time, and I also did it because I was curious to see what selling in Asia was like. And I would say that from a K-12 perspective, the buying dynamics in Asia are infinitely better than the buying dynamics in North America, which I was really surprised by. We actually had schools paying like $5,000 lump sum checks in person at the conferences we were attending, which I don't think we've ever had in any conference across North America or Europe. And it's just like, if they see something that they like, they really, really go for it. That being said, you've got to have your value proposition down really, really well, because they're quite savvy buyers. Higher education there, I would say is a little bit more conservative, and their spending, especially on IT, is more restricted. But I found the K-12 market there quite interesting. But again, you run into those issues with localization, and unless you're willing to have an office there full time. I also think that one of the other key challenges in selling into the Asia region is they like to know that you're there permanently. You're not just parachuting in trying to make a quick sale. And so even if you have a local partner, it doesn't really help, because the second that you kind of get into bigger deals, they want to know that you're there and that you're maintaining a presence. So again, I think for all of those reasons, I think at the early stage, you really need to focus on where your biggest market is, and where it's easiest for you to sell, which almost certainly is North America. I would say just quickly on Canada. For us, we found that Canadian institutions are way less risk adverse, so they don't like taking chances on startups until you've really kind of got your proven track record. And they also have much smaller budgets than their U.S. counterparts. And then you also have to deal with FIPO requirements, which kind of stipulate that you can't host data outside of Canada. So if you're dealing with Canadian public institutions, everything's got to be within Canada. Suddenly you get a Canadian data center and your US data center. It's twice as much cost, twice as much expense. So I'd say as much as possible, it's fine to kind of validate your product in Canada. But in terms of trying to make the Canadian market your primary market, I think it would be crazy, given that the US market is so much larger, and you don't have to deal with those FIPO requirements.
Okay. Thanks, Stuart. Appreciate it. Scott, comment?
So mine's really quick here. I'll sort of emphasize two things. First of all, with First Class and again with Edsby, we are targeting international. There's just 2 points that I'll make here. The first thing is, I would agree, don't knock yourself out early, right? It's hard to break into international markets. With that said, like with First Class, we ended up getting the entire country of Denmark. It is possible to do, okay? But it's a long-term play. So I would say up front, you need to be keeping two things in mind. First of all, as you build your product, build it so that it is internationalizable. So you want to make sure that you have full Unicode support and that you can localize your product. And the other thing, specifically in Edu and specifically in K-12, that oftentimes there is a lot of localization required just in nomenclature and stuff like that. I mean, do you get assignments or assessments? Do you get tests? How do you show the average to students and all that kind of stuff? So you have to build your product with the idea that not just the language is going to change between here and Denmark, but even, how do they mark tests? Do they use percentages? Do they use letter grades? Well, it turns out that they don't use letter grades in Denmark, right? So you have to be prepared to manage all of that. And if you're building a cloud-based product, then it's even more difficult because you want a single cloud server that's going to serve out multiple localized products. So we're very lucky in the sense that we'd been through it once before. So with Edsby, we were able to do that from the beginning. Oftentimes, a lot of development teams don't sort of realize that, so they don't bother, and then they're kind of hooped.
Yeah. Great comments, guys. As you can tell, there's a plethora of considerations as you're going international. And a lot of times companies will say, hey, I got this opportunity in Australia or whatever because it landed in their lap. You got to think about what are the implications of that and back to that idea of focus. So
and are you going to make money on it?
Are you going to make money? Of course.
It could be a $100,000 deal that you lose money on.
Yeah, of course. Many considerations, and we could have a whole topic, a whole session just on that. But we're going to move along. Guys, one of the realities, of course, is RFPs in this space. And I want to keep this piece really short. I'm looking for 2-3 words on the do's or don'ts as it relates to RFPs. Because I think many in the audience are going to be dealing with RFPs at some point in this space. So, Scott, you want to start? Just 1 or 2 do's or don'ts.
I love RFPs. I mean, I love RFPs. I've done almost a dozen. I think I've done 11 since January. The biggest one was 650 pages. It's the way it goes, right? I love RFPs because you are being handed a silver platter in which you can compete on an even footing with, I don't know, giant companies like D2L, right? Like you really can. Not this year though. So an RFP is a great opportunity for you to showcase just how great you are. There's nothing to stop you from a truly stunning RFP response. You can position yourself how you want. You can lay your product out exactly the way that you want. I'd highly recommend, it's worth, like if you're seriously thinking about K-12, it's worthwhile subscribing to the RFP Watch. There's services that'll watch it for you. Subscribe to all the different Bidingo and stuff like that. Watch for the ones that you really can meet. There are obviously long shot ones that are going to be unlikely for you to meet, but if there's one that you meet, you absolutely want to go for it. One little hint I'll give you, again, going back to the last thing about going international. Oftentimes there is a limitation that you can't respond if you're not in country. So you got to think about setting up business partners. Again, if you're lucky, you'll have business partners from your previous businesses and stuff like that, and be able to respond with those. But RFPs are your friend. Make them look stunning, beautiful, professional.
Yeah, great comments. Mohsen.
Maybe you should give me a lesson on that,
Yeah.
because you don't have. I hate it. Actually, I was going to say I hated them, and I do. I just thought that they're. One thing I don't know. You guys had good success more in K-12 or higher education?
K-12.
Or both?
K-12.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe higher education is different because we had a few, experience with them, and 80% of them, it was like they already picked the vendor they wanted, and it was more like formalities, and it just wasted their time. But I mean, again, statistically, we still, I guess it's too early for me to actually have a conclusive judgment on that. But yeah, I guess if you say that, that's great. I'm going to love them from now on.
But you're touching on a point I think is really important. So like any sales process, right? If you're coming in always at the RFP stage and it's already been written, a lot of times you haven't had the chance to help guide that. It's always better if you're up front helping them create that RFP. So I think that's one of the things that comes out there. Stuart, any last real quick point on this part?
Yeah, I have two, or maybe two sentences. Don't overpromise, underdeliver. Don't check boxes you don't have, because they will find it eventually, and when they do, it will cost you your reputation if you start selling to institutions or to schools that in scenarios where you are, saying like, oh yeah, we've got that, and you really don't. You'll destroy all of the work you're doing to build your brand.
Okay. Great, really good advice.
Yes.
Absolutely. Next piece I want to touch on here is the notion of pilot. It's one of those things that comes up often, and it was raised earlier. So really quickly, guys, is there a brief point that you could suggest on how to move things along to get past the initial pilot? And maybe Stuart,
Sure. So stakeholder engagement, really knowing who the key stakeholders are, and then regularly checking in with them. So just as an example, we did start a rollout with the School of Visual Arts in New York. I've been working directly with their CIO and their Chief Academic Officer, and I'll just every 2 weeks I'll send them a little email. It's like, hey, how's it going? Any challenges? I'm here. And from a CEO level, directly to them, I think that they really appreciate that kind of handholding. And as they come up with issues, it also really helps because you can help them kind of work through those challenges. You don't want to get to the point where you're at the end of the pilot period and they're like, oh, well, we didn't really use the product because we ran into these issues. And they were issues that you could have resolved, the second or third week in. The whole goal of this is that you want them to become a larger paying customer. And so supporting them through that period, I think, is really important. So it comes down to really good account management, identifying objections during the pilot, and then actively working to get through those issues, and providing great support is another piece of it. And just on the support note, I would also say that if it's easy for you to do, definitely have videos on your support topics, because it just helps them so much more with making sure they can roll out your product properly. Because it's not just you training them, it's that they also have to train all of their faculty or the students that are using the product. So all of those things will maximize that stakeholder engagement.
Thanks, Stuart. Mohsen.
Yeah, I love pilots. So bullet points, to be quick. I mean, yes, what you said is absolutely right. Find the early adopters, or whoever is going to do the pilot, find them the ones that are really excited about your product. So if you have the option to pick the one that they're going to pilot, go and find the best one, because that's the only chance you have to demonstrate your products. So pick the best one. It's very important. Don't just be lazy and think that, if we get some people, they're enough, so they're going to work out. So no, go out and just try to find the best people that you could. It's worth the investment of the time. Have a kickoff session with all the parties involved at the beginning. Tell them exactly what is their expectation, what is the deliverable that they want, what is the successful outcome should look like. Try to have a clear idea what is they're looking for. Because a lot of times you think that you know what they're looking for, but in the back of their mind, they're actually looking for some things else that you don't even know. So try to figure out exactly what is the major criteria. Things that maybe for you is very minor, but for them is a big deal. And like Steve said, give them the concierge treatment. Just support them, engage them, check out with them once every, we have, for a few pilots, we had a daily checking that we just, across the company, we send it to executive, a status of these pilots today, this amount of tickets were submitted, this amount of, issues were raised or whatever. So we had a daily dashboard for all these pilots to make sure that everything is going as supposed to. Because really you only have that period of window of time to demonstrate your product, so you really want to do the best. So it's very important. And the final point, and it's a bit tricky, but if you could get it done, that would be great. If you could get your pilot paid, even though at a discounted price, that's a huge, huge sales. What I found is that the pilots that are free, they're 4 or 5 times more likely to fail. The reason is that they're not engaged. They just want to do it because it doesn't cost them anything. Oh, you know what? That's great. We're going to pilot it. No one cares. Yeah. So if you could get them to pay a little bit, Just give them 80% discount, 90% discount, doesn't matter. Just get them to pay you something, because then they start using it. So I think these are my points.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Scott, quickly.
So
yeah, I
funnily
think
enough,
that's a really good point, Mohsen. I would also echo that sentiment on never do unpaid pilots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So funnily enough, on pilots, exact opposite of RFPs. I hate pilots. I hate pilots.
We can trade.
Partially because our particular product is integrated with the student information system in the district. We have real expenses and real heavy lifting to get it up and running. And it's not worth it for a pilot. And especially in K-12, even if you drop something in teachers' laps in the middle of a school year, you drop something in their laps in February, they're not going to be adopting it, right? Yeah. It doesn't work so well in K-12. In K-12, I think pilots are less important, especially with something like ours, which is 100% deployment across the district. So.
Interesting perspectives. In rapid fire, can you give me an idea of the range of time for the sales cycle? Just quickly, what do you see?
For me, for a private school, it can be as short as a week.
And as long as?
2 years.
Yeah.
2 years is pretty typical. Like 1 year of engagement plus 1 year of serious RFP in a say top 100 U.S. K-12 district.
Mohsen.
I see a wider range. I can see it as quick as 1 day or a few hours if you're selling it to a student, because the students could be a buyer, was different. Or it could be as long as 3 or 4 years, depending on if you're beating the previous vendors that they have a contract of 5 years, so you can never go away. You have to wait for 5 years. So.
Yeah. Stuart.
So our lead to close average is 72 days. I would say that that's our averaging. But I think the longest deal that we've ever done is maybe 12 months.
Can I just quickly ask folks in the room, give me an idea how many people have questions, just so I know to gauge here whether I should cut things off now. So we have a few at least. Okay, I'm going to ask probably 2 more questions here, and then we're going to get to yours, okay? Guys, one of the things is around that decision-making unit. Can you comment real quickly just to profile that from your perspective? Because I think you've hinted that it's different in K-12 versus higher ed. And if you just give me a real quick answer, Stuart.
Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, just the profile of the decision-making unit that you're dealing with.
Oh, in terms of how we find it?
How you find it, what does it look like?
Yeah, so, generally, with the marketing activities that you'll notice quickly who's engaging. And then if you're asking the question, and we always ask this at the end of every like our first call with a customer, who's the key decision maker, and then you'll start getting a very quick perspective on who that is. Generally, just ask,
Okay.
and we've always found that's quite effective.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Mohsen.
Yeah, again, bullet points. You love me because my question's I'm gonna answer with bullet points. This is easier. Don't just look at the titles. Like the director of teaching and learning, it doesn't mean that they're gonna make a decision about teaching and learning technology, even though their title is director of teaching and learning technology. So just don't just look at what is the title. Go on. You got to go and figure out. You got to ask them. And you got to be engaged with a lot of conversation to figure out who's that decision maker. But I would say for anything related to teaching, essentially is a teacher. Teachers is the decision making because they're going to use a product. So for higher education again, for our product, so you need to have the buy-in from the teachers. Even though the schools adopt it, but the teachers don't use it, then they're not going to renew because their adoption is low. So the teachers are important. If you're sending to the students, then they would be their students or their parents. So those are the ones that they pay. But sometimes the students pay, but the teachers make a decision. So like a textbook. So you go and convince a prof to adopt a textbook or in our technology, but the students pay. So then the decision maker is a teacher. So these are a few examples. I don't know if
Sure, that's great. Scott.
So in K-12, teachers have no power whatsoever, absolutely zero. But the bright side is they don't have the power to say no either. So the decision is going to get made at a central location. It's guaranteed that it's going to be made by a committee. It's going to have people on there like CIOs. It's going to have teacher representatives. It's probably going to have district superintendents. If you're selling into maybe a private school, then it's probably going to be the head of the school and the CIO, somebody like that. Way more important than the economic buyer when you're selling into an environment like that is to have a champion. You're not going to be there on that committee. You want somebody who loves your product and is going to be fighting for you and is going to be on the phone afterwards saying, okay, here's what I need.
That's
champion.
really incredibly important advice right there.
Got to have a champion.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. The last question then, in one sentence, if you were to give advice to the audience, what is the one thing top of mind for you that you'd want to share with the audience today to be successful in this market? Scott, you look like you're ready.
No, I'm not, actually.
Okay. It's hard to boil it down to that.
It is a hard question. My message would be don't give up, right? It is a very hard market. You're going to get people saying no. You're going to get VCs saying no. You're going to get people saying there's no money in education. There's going to be a lot of people saying no to you, and you have to fight.
Thanks.
Mohsen? Yeah, so I wanted to say the same thing, but now I have to change it because I want to. But what something is important is that I guess be flexible. Don't just think that this is what you build, this is your business model. Now you're gonna go and just keep hitting, just throw out the ball, just shoot the ball, and then nothing's happened. So if you don't see any results, then change it. You're not gonna change anything if you just keep throwing the same ball. So I would say just be flexible. There's a lot of things that you could do. There's a lot of decision-making people there. There's a lot of ways that you could model your business. Who can pay? What is your offering? What is the value proposition? I would say be flexible.
Yeah, that's great. Stuart, one sentence.
Yeah, I think that Mohsen probably hit my number one on the head there, but I'll just throw another one out, and that was one that I touched on earlier, and I wish that we had found far sooner, which is that data is really your friend, especially if you're in higher education. There's just so much of it out there on every single person you could possibly sell to, and I would definitely maximize that and use that to your advantage because it doesn't exist in pretty much any other market vertical you look at. And so education is really unique there, and so I'd use those kind of uniquenesses to your advantage.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, guys. Very insightful commentary. I think you get the idea that there's just a lot of things to think about. These guys clearly have a depth of knowledge in understanding this market, so really appreciate the thoughts and the insight. Folks, looks like there were a number of questions in the audience.
Hi. I had a question. Early on, you talked about the difference between the economic buyer and the end user. And I'm wondering, is there any case that you can rally the end user to try and pull something through in terms of a sale? Or if you depend on the confidence of those end users to even pilot or trial, how do you reach a group of teachers? Because they don't go to South by Southwest.
Yeah. Very, very important question. We're not necessarily going to hear from all three for each of these Q&A, but anyone want to kick off an answer?
I can say something.
And I've got an answer too. Yeah, you go first.
Mohsen, go ahead.
I guess I would say from our experience, we approached the economic buyer first, and then we realized that that's taking forever, and sometimes they're not even understanding what the problem is. So we went to the end user because the end user, actually used the product. So what we did was we got the end user, and then we kind of pivoted a little bit, changed our model, so we get the students to pay. So we started with the small little seeds in the school, and then once we have enough of the end users, then you can go and talk to the economic buyers because now you have some people that are actually using it and they're happy about it. So I think that's worked for us. That's what I'm saying, be flexible and change the model.
Whereas in our case, our end users can't use the product unless it's integrated with the district student information system, right? So we can't sell to those end users. And there's something else that's worth thinking about as well. I could show you a place where we went and sold Edsby. We got 300,000, 250,000 users there. I know for a fact that we have a free end user adopted product, and there was something like 10,000 users there in that district. Didn't make any difference when the RFP gets filled out, right? So you got to remember that even though you have those end users, that's not going to stop you from getting wiped out by an RFP.
I guess in higher education is a bit different.
Yeah, higher ed is definitely different.
Stuart, anything else to add, or we?
Yeah, I kind of would also echo that sentiment that I think it really depends on your product as to whether or not you're able to go directly to end user. Similarly, we also have that kind of situation where we have to do a variety of enterprise level integrations in order to kind of have the whole piece work. So you can't really do it without having a central IT or central buy-off. So I think it really honestly just depends on your product and what you're selling.
That's great.
Can I add one comment quick
Yeah.
here? Because this is, I guess, my belief in that. I know that the problem is, like you mentioned, sometimes you have the end user, but at the end of the day, if the RFP is not in your favor, you're going to be out of the business. I think eventually what we're going to do is that the end user is the one that matters the most. So I think that's what that's the role of entrepreneurs. You got to figure out how you come up with a way to give the users more power to be able to have that decision. So I guess if you want to just follow what's been out there so far, yes, I think this is the general advice that everyone has here. But what I would say is that just be a little bit of entrepreneurs. Just change it. It's okay to charge the students. It's okay. Just charge them a little bit. It's okay. Don't think that this hasn't been done in the past. Oh, wow, what we're going to do here now. So you got to be a little bit creative. So just try different things.
Thanks for the perspectives, guys. Next question.
Hi, my name is Poppy. I'm the founder of Our Republic. We work with 21 school boards across the province of Ontario. And so I heard your comment, all three of your comments related to free pilots. I have to admit that most of our pilots are free, and I'm kind of kicking myself. However, I do want to comment on that. I feel that because the barrier to entry into a school board is so high, that has been the easiest way that I can get into a school board. But although I guess, is your advice to even charge a little, like, hey, $50 to participate in the pilot, or just to have that transaction so that it feels more serious to them? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if you can get, so first of all, the fact you've had to do free trials, I mean, my motto is always whatever it takes.
Yeah,
right?
whatever it
takes. Whatever it takes. But the flip side is, you want them to get the idea that there is an economic transaction. And so getting anything out of them, then you're a vendor and you've got a number and,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
We started doing free trials for an unlimited period of time. We just give a small amount of storage and bandwidth, and that would kind of be the constraint. And kind of got to a point where we realized that, like, from a sales perspective, it was really slowing things down because they spend a lot of time playing with things and wanting to get everything all set up before they really start rolling the product out. So we switched free off, and we had an immediate revenue jump by a couple $100K the next quarter. And it was amazing how much of a difference it made. And it was just that there were tons of institutions that normally would be paying for the product, even if it was a pilot product, and they just weren't before. So it's amazing when you flip that switch. How few institutions will have a problem with it.
Thanks, Stuart. Mohsen, good?
I guess I get dependent time. I can say something. I mean, for us, it was more to filter out. People say, I want to filter out the ones that are not really engaged and are not interested. They don't know that at the end of the day there's a transaction. So that's why But I would not say no to anyone who wants to do a free pilot. I still do it.
Okay.
Great.
Do you mind if I ask another question?
Real quick one?
Okay.
We'll get one answer from
It's
it. How's that?
specific. Edsby, you had mentioned Denmark and Florida, but you're based in Canada. So what is your traction in Canada? And if you don't have as much traction here, why not? Like, what is your barrier?
We don't have another school board that large in Canada, that's for sure. We have a lot of private schools. Canadian boards are fairly conservative. You know what it's like. School boards are perhaps one of the most conservative places in the world for a good reason, right? They're dealing with their kids. They have legal constraints, right? There's lots of good reasons why they're conservative. It just takes time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. Next question.
Hi. I obviously don't know the makeup of a lot of your companies in this room, but one of my questions was, based on what I've heard today, I would be scared to jump into the education market. It sounds like it's a very challenging place. So what I wanted to ask you was your thoughts and opinion on balancing if your product or service can be used in industry. What's the right mix, or what have the three of you done to kind of make that strategic decision to be, well, I can probably land cash flow in the next 3 months if I maybe start with industry, and how you maybe balance your resources into the industry versus the educational realm for those of us who may have the privilege of that problem?
Okay, guys, we'll have to keep this one really short. So
Yeah, sorry, that don't big.
that's a big question.
I'll go incredibly quick. So First Class was just like that. Now, we had the big advantage that our very first customer was in Edu, and then we flipped around and sold to business. And if you want to build a horizontal market product, great, then you can sell to both. And that can fill in your sales. It is great if you can do that. Flip side is it can be very difficult to build a targeted product then, because of course, the nomenclature between Edu and Corp is very different.
Sure. So, most.
Yeah, it would be challenging. I'm going to be honest with you. I think we have been thinking about kind of having this industry part in our business that we also sell it to the corp and all that. I haven't been a big fan of that idea, even though I consider there's definitely a cash could potentially come in. I think you're distracting yourself. Personally, this is my personal opinion. I think I would much rather be the one that I know that I am going to fix the problem of education, in higher education, in the classroom engagement. And I want to just keep, conveying the same message, just, set myself as a thought leadership so, I get a longer, return in the long term. So this is my advice because I'm passionate. I guess it depends on what brings it to this market.
Thanks, Mohsen. Stuart, any quick comment?
Yeah, we have a few global 500 companies that use our product.
Stuart, we've lost your audio. I'm afraid we're going to have to.
Most companies, the reason they're using our product is because they're building their own internal universities, and their requirements are exactly the same as one of our university customers. So we really don't have to modify our product or change anything dramatically in order to sell to them. I think that's fairly rare, and I would also say that we do not target corporates in any way. So they just they find us, they come to us, and then it's just kind of like we treat them like any university. We don't try to make special cases for them, and I think that if you're going to do it, like Mohsen's saying, you really have to be focused on your core market, and if that somehow appeals to corporates, then why not leave the revenue or take the revenue on the table? But I certainly feel like it's very difficult if you were to try to it's for this and then also for this, and they're completely two different use cases. It's a massive split of focus.
I would absolutely echo that comment. Opportunistic is one thing, but targeting those different groups is a very different story. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing is vertical, unless it's really, 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 really easy to spin off slightly off that into corporate.
Or it's a truly horizontal product.
right. Yeah, fair enough.
That's right.
Another question from the audience.
Okay, thank you. Jean McKen, Reason Through Theory is our product, and it's a specialized product. It's for a specialized subject. Rather, my assumption is that your products are all across the board, can be used by any subject. And we find that our end users are really the target for getting adoption. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice or insight in terms of reaching out to the IT folks and those kinds of people in the K-12 market.
Yeah, sure. So what I would say is that specific subject verticals in K-12 are actually really quite attractive. So the circle kind of comes full cycle because then suddenly you are dealing with end users. So I know a guy who builds IEP, Individual Education Program software for K-12, and that's kind of interesting because it's kind of all the way around back to it's suddenly not so much like K-12. Because you're solving a really specific product, you're solving it for specific educators. Oftentimes the people in charge at the school district don't really know that business very well, and so they're much more likely to listen to those particular users.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Since it was a K-12 question, we'll go to Stuart. Any comment on this one?
No, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Okay, fair enough. We'll take one. Thank you for your question. One last question, and then we're really out of time.
It's a quick question. Being local and trying to concentrate on the Ontario market, does it make sense to go after the boards or go after the private schools, one school at a time? Does it make sense to go after the boards where it requires a lot of resource and a longer lead time?
Maybe Scott, we'll push that one to you.
Yeah, sure. My answer to that is it's purely price point and what you can make a profit at. So if, selling to private schools is great. Again, with First Class and with Edsby both, we sold to private schools. They make decisions quickly, they have a lot of money, and they can give you prestige. So, if you sold to St. Andrews and you walk into York Board of Education, that's great, right? They know that. It's often great to have a private school where you're going after a board. On the other hand, economically, you might not be able to sustain your business selling to private schools. So,
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the comments there. Folks, we really are out of time here because we said we'd finish by 1:30 at the latest. So with that, I do want to thank the panelists for your insight and the commentary on a range of topics here within selling into the education ecosystem. Really appreciate that perspective. I think there's a number of things that have come out that hopefully you can take with you and put into action as you get back to the office this afternoon or tomorrow. Ideally, that's going to help you move the bar along within the game that you're playing. So, folks, thank you very much for making the comments, panelists, to all of you for your interest, and certainly this is a topic of great interest. I think we could probably continue on because I certainly had a bunch of other questions I was going to ask the guys. We just couldn't get to them today. Hopefully there'll be a chance for a future session. So again, thanks for your attention and time. We appreciate you being part of this, and hopefully we'll see you at a future best practices session. So have a great rest of the day. Thank you, panelists.